Whether it's a movie night or just midday, Skinny Pop is a salty snack that keeps on giving. Made with just 3 simple ingredients for an irresistibly delicious taste and a large serving size that lasts. Deliciously popped, perfectly salted. Skinny Pop, popular for a reason. Shop Skinny Pop now.
I'm JJ Virgin, PhD dropout, sorry mom, turned 4-time New York Times bestselling author. Yes, I'm a certified nutrition specialist, fitness Hall of Famer, and I speak at health conferences and trainings around the globe. But I'm driven by my insatiable curiosity and love of science to keep asking questions, digging for answers, and sharing the information I uncover with as many people as I can. And that's why I created the Well Beyond 40 podcast, to synthesize and simplify the science of health into actionable strategies to help you thrive. In each episode, we'll talk about what's working in the world of wellness, from personalized nutrition and healing your metabolism to healthy aging and prescriptive fitness. Join me on the journey to better health so you can love how you look and feel right now and have the energy to play full out at 100. Have we just gotten too comfortable? If you really think about what has happened even over the last 100 years, or even over the last couple decades, where we've got temperature controlled, where we've got, things doing the housework for us, like Roombas, where we can get food delivered in 30 minutes. I always say the less you do, the less you can do. And, a lot of this stuff just sets us up for having a lot of the different health problems we see, and probably why we're seeing this exponential increase in obesity and diabetes and all of the lifestyle diseases. So we're going to unpack that today with the co-founder and CEO of Commune. And his name is Jeff Krasno. I was fortunate to meet him through my buddy, Dr. David Perlmutter. And this is a super cool project that you are going to want to check out. In fact, you're going to get a free 30-day membership to it. It's a masterclass platform for personal and societal well-being. And all sorts of cool people are in there teaching classes, like Dr. Sarah Gottfried, Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Jeff Bland, Dr. David Perlmutter, a lot of people you've seen over here on the podcast and buddies. He also has a great podcast called Commune Podcast, where he has interviewed, Gabor Mate and Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra. And he also writes a weekly column called Commusings. So he has been on his own personal health journey, even though he's been in the field for decades as running a yoga program. You'll hear about his own transformation that started 4 years ago. That is super cool. He is the creator of Good Stress, which is a collection of wellness protocols developed to reverse diabetes, and this is, by the way, what he did to reverse his diabetes, lose 60 pounds, and get his health back at age 50. And so we are going to be digging into what is creating the challenges we have with our health, but more importantly, what are some of the things that you can do? What are some of the things that you can do that you can start reversing this and then habit stacking on this, so that just like what Jeff did, where 4 years later his health is completely transformed and happened fairly quickly, you can do it too. I will be right back with Jeff, and I just want to give you this one website URL, because this is where I'm going to put your free membership. It will be at jjvirgin.com/1commune. I'll be right back with Jeff. Stay with me. Jeff Krasno, welcome to the show. Super excited to hang out with you today.
Oh, JJ, it's such a treat. Thanks for having me on and for letting me speak to your amazing community. Appreciate it.
Yes. Well, what's really interesting is so many of the things that we have created, like the modern day comforts, our culture, is really what's undermining our health. And so I don't know really how to rectify that, but that's what we're going to dig in today too, is all these creature comforts, all the way that we live now is kind of in stark contrast to our biology, our physiology, and what we really need to be doing. So let's dig into that. And to start us off, like paint the picture for where we are now and how this is impacting our health.
Yeah, 100%. So I think you put your thumb right on it. Our culture has in many ways usurped or hijacked our biology. So, nature makes mistakes in execution from time to time, right? There are mutations, but nature doesn't really make mistakes in terms of design. And, this organism and yours and everybody listening, we are the product of millions of years of hominid evolution and hundreds of thousands of years of Homo sapien evolution. And over those massive swaths of time, we built up these adaptive mechanisms in relation to our environment. And, our environment for hundreds of thousands of years honestly didn't change that much. We had what I call Paleolithic stressors. We were opportunistic omnivores, and we ate lots of plants and tubers and seeds and occasional wild game. But we also really had to endure periods of calorie paucity or food scarcity. That was just simply customary as part of life. And we built adaptive mechanisms in our body around that. It's called storing fat. Like we love to vilify fat, right? And for many good reasons. But it's a nice cushion and it's an endocrine organ. But really what it is, it's just warehoused energy, right? And that was adaptive because, in the fall, the body knew that winter's fallow was right around the corner. So it was like, my great-great-great-great-grandfather's loincloth got a little tight in the fall for a good reason. But of course, in modern times, and this is just one example, we've engineered our lives for endless, cheap, shelf-stable, nutrient-deficient foodstuffs, endless calories. And when you don't have those periods of scarcity and you're only storing fat, well, guess what happens? You have a 45% obesity rate. You have an obesity crisis. And candidly, that's not a bug in the system. That is the normal and expected result of our Paleolithic genome simply trying to cope with our lifestyle, with the way that we live our life. And there's so many examples of that phenomena, essentially everywhere we look.
Yeah, I always like to say your body does exactly what you're telling it to do, right? And I think what's interesting, and you hit on this, is if you look at the seasons, and then you look at sunlight, and I'm not talking about maybe if you lived in, say, Sweden or Iceland, places that have these enormous swings in daylight and night throughout the year. But in the normal places, during the summer, the days get longer, and so you sleep less. And because you're sleeping less, you're more insulin resistant. And by the way, it's also the same time that we have fruit. And so now we're eating more fruit. We are more insulin resistant. We're storing more calories as fat. And then we go into the winter where we're sleeping more. The days are shorter because we didn't have lights. So we'd be sleeping more. We'd be more insulin sensitive. We'd be able to use that stored fat for fuel, right? That's just one of those examples of nature being super smart. Now we have lights. We have fruit year round. Besides the fact we have ultra-processed food, which is one we can totally go down into, we also have all sorts of food variety all year round that we never would have had in, easy amounts, and we don't have to do any work for it. I'm trying to think of where I heard about just the amount of work we used to have to do just for food. I mean, I just think of even the amount of housework my mom used to do versus now, you can have, a Roomba or a Zumba, the thing that goes around.
I don't have one of those. But, you're absolutely right. In the palm of my hand on a whim, I can order up a piece of fruit in or out of season and have it delivered here by the time we finish our conversation. I mean, that's crazy.
Right.
And really, again, just that comfort and convenience upends our engineering. So you nailed it. We become a little insulin resistant in the summer by design. because instead of using that glucose or that fat for energy production, our body says, no, store it away because, scarcity is a coming. And you're right with fruit, for example, with fructose, which, is a signal to the body. It tells the body also to become insulin resistant. Like I'm sure you've talked to David Perlmutter about this, who wrote about uric acid, and Rick Johnson, et cetera, is that we lost that gene to break down uric acid sometime 15 million years ago, and that gene got silenced for very good reason, because the ice age was coming down across Europe, and the harvest calendar was shorter. So fructose was basically a sign, store fat, because the harvest season is so short now. And so again, the body is, when you unpack the wisdom in it, it never really makes a mistake. And a lot of people ask me, and I know they ask you this all the time, like, how do I be healthy? And I've started to try to answer that more simply because there's so many different ways to do it. And the way I look at it is I ask myself, well, how did I evolve, right? So you said, like, how hard did I actually have to work for food? Well, I walked 10 miles a day, right? I mean, in the Hadza and the Kung people, the kind of last remaining hunter-gatherer tribes, they're walking still 6 to 8 miles a day. And so, you ask yourself, well, what should I be doing in terms of exercise? Well, again, how did I evolve? I walked a lot. I had to carry heavy things from, from time to time. Every once in a while, maybe against my will, I had to break into a sprint if I was being, chased by an ungulate or something. So, these are, sometimes the answers are hidden, right in plain sight.
I was fortunate, I think it was 20 years ago. I was sitting in a lecture. I don't know if I've ever heard Dr. Loren Cordain speak. Do you know who he is?
Just by name, but that's it.
So 20 years ago, I was in this little group. I think maybe there were 12 people, and Dr. Loren Cordain, they'd hired him to do a lecture on Paleolithic nutrition. And it was like I thought my head was going to blow off. I was like, this is so fascinating. But when you think about it and go, okay, we're still basically 10,000 years old. And yet now we're in this time where everything is completely opposite to what our bodies were designed to do, how we were designed to move, eat. And so if you can go back and look and to make the best of your guesses as to what things were like back then in terms of how we ate, how we lived, the type of stressors we were under, the toxins we might have been assaulted with, and you look at what's going on now and with so many of these diseases that are purely created diseases based on a wrong lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they did die much earlier than we did. Their life expectancy was anywhere around the mid-30s, let's say. And even at the top of the 20th century in 1900, I think it was maybe 46 or 48 years. So, but of course, the reason for that is that, we hadn't solved for infection or infant mortality or infectious disease and communicable diseases. Modern medicine, to its credit, has actually done a fairly decent job with, tending to smallpox, for example, that killed 300 million people in the 20th century alone. Right now, in 2024, we are choosing the way that we die, and not, often with abundant thoughtfulness. All of these chronic diseases, the diabetes, heart disease, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, all these are really products of culture. When you look at the rates of these diseases 50, 60 years ago, they're basically non-existent. There was a little cancer back in, the hunter-gatherer days, not very much, but all of those other chronic diseases didn't exist. And even 50 or 60 years ago, they didn't really exist in great numbers. So our genome obviously doesn't change in 50 years. So what's up? It's such an obvious answer. It's the way that we're living. It's how we're choosing to live. And that is bad news and good news at the same time, because when we understand the nature of our organism and how we're engineered, we do actually have a lot of agency over our behaviors and our exposome, and can align ourselves with our engineering.
Cool. So let's unpack, like, I'm going to go through one by one and we can unpack, like, why is this a challenge? How does this help? And, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking about I don't remember who the doctor was, but it was like, I think 60 Minutes, and they were talking about the new weight loss drugs. And this doctor was talking how obesity was genetic. And I thought, you know what? How could that be when 0.5% of the population in the 1900s was obese, and now it's 45%? How could that be a genetic situation? How could it be? Come on.
Come on.
Right?
Yeah. No, clearly there are predispositions to store fat in some cases. There's this case for the thrifty gene or whatever. But you're 100% right. This is not a genetic phenomenon.
No.
And you don't
Lifestyle.
need to be an evolutionary biologist to figure that out. You can just look at basic common sense.
Right.
I think there's also, I think it was in 2013, the AMA classified, obesity as a disease. And, there was a lot of disagreement around that. But, the categorization of this as a disease, sort of, in some ways relieves people of the responsibility that they have, because they just feel like, oh, well, I'm a victim, like it's a disease. And then obviously enables pharmaceutical companies to, it enables us to label it as a disease and then treat it as a disease, often with cocktails of drugs. And obviously, that's a big topic today. So we don't have to get into that one. Yeah.
That and health at any size is just hurting people. It's a disservice. And, I realize, we could step into it a little bit and people might get mad, but I ultimately am here for, team humanity and how can we help people the most. And by giving them misinformation and trying to make things okay, that doesn't help. And, you look at something like obesity and, I think step one is not only do we have food available at all times. I mean, now I can get food delivered in under an hour and pretty much anything that you want. But we also have this rise of ultra-processed foods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And candidly, I wouldn't take stress and trauma out of the equation. I mean, food is a salve. It's an emotional and psychological salve. It triggers the same reward systems in the brain, as drugs and exercise and all of these other things. And it wasn't around as a salve, in the way it is now for thousands and thousands of years. And so, I look at, and this is very personal for me because I grew up as an extremely overweight kid up until 4 years ago. I was 210 pounds really before you knew me. And, I was borderline diabetic. My fasting glucose was 125 milligrams per deciliter. My hemoglobin A1C was 6.7%. So I was not in great shape. So I can speak from a good deal of personal experience. And candidly, I was, always suffering as a kid. I had a lot of difficulty moving around the world, being chubby, not really fitting in. And, I ate my feelings. Right. And I carried that into adulthood. And it wasn't really until the light bulb went off around a lot of the things, honestly, that we're talking about, that I started to become an intermittent faster, for example. And when I couldn't just mindlessly wander over to the cupboard and pick up a bag of chips, I had to examine the nature of that hunger, of that stimulus, and delineate whether or not it was a biological need or a psychological or emotional desire. And once I became sort of a disciple to that practice, I started to untangle and delineate between those two things. And I started to make unconscious behavior conscious, such that then I could change my habits. And for me, that was huge. And it wasn't just, for me, it's fasting started with food, but then I was able to impose that scarcity on other parts of my life. Whether that was like digital devices or, shopping, and also find that mindset between stimulus, like Viktor Frankl, I think famously said, like, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and liberation. So, I was able to find that space such that when other aggravating things happen in my life, I have 3 kids, they're always doing things to annoy me.
What's aggravating, right? There? Come on.
Yeah, they're always doing things to annoy me. But instead of just reacting and having an outsized response, to their behavior, I found I was able to refine that skill and find that space and ask myself, what is the nature of their behavior? Why are they acting this way? What is the appropriate response? And so, this is a place where, for example, self-imposed scarcity became really, really useful for me.
There's a lot in what you just said, like a lot of great life lessons. Was there a catalyst, like a turning point? Like you said, this was 4 years ago, and you're right. Like I know you as you now. And there's so much when someone makes this shifts in terms of shifting self-identity. What was the turning point? Like, what made you start to look at this?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like JJ, like so many of the people listening to this, I had these symptoms that were so common and anodyne that essentially we've completely normalized them. I had, chronic fatigue, brain fog, irritability, insomnia, these things that are completely, honestly, abnormal, but we've made them completely normal. And because they're normal, they're so easy to just sort of write off, oh, I just had a bad day, But really, they were just upstream from the realization that I got was, I put a continuous glucose monitor on my triceps, and I stared into the app, and I was like, that can't be right. I'm Jeff Krasno. I ran a yoga festival for 10 years. I shop at Whole Foods. I pay my taxes and raise my children. Like,
I'm a good guy.
I can't be a statistic. And lo and behold, I was essentially borderline diabetic at the highest level of prediabetes. And, I also had plenty of insults to my vanity. I had dad bod. So I had, the inner tube here and the, what's clinically known as gynecomastia, but I'm sure more known in your world as man boobs and other sort of just insults to the way I looked. But it was really, at 49, discovering that I had metabolic dysfunction and not in the early chapters of it. And then, knowing what's downstream from that. And then I got COVID really early on in February, March 2020, even kind of a little bit before we knew what it was. And I got really sick. And I had symptoms that lasted for months. I had low-grade chronic fevers, et cetera. And as I began to learn more about COVID and who it impacted more severely than other people, I was like, whoa, I'm that statistic again. Because if you started to actually unpack the COVID statistics, the severe contractions that led to death and hospitalizations and severe cases were disproportionate among people with metabolic disease, either diabetes or obesity, et cetera. And I was in that camp. And at that juncture, I felt like I just needed to take agency and control over my own life. And I started to slowly stack, these protocols until, but here's the amazing thing, is that it didn't take long. And my body was really dying to heal. And many of your listeners may resonate with this because I always associated health with downward spirals, but I found an upward spiral in my health. As I started to institute these protocols, it was wild. I just started to gain back energy, gain back ability to focus. I read in 2018, I think, I read 0 books. Since that time, I think I've read 500 books. And it was really because I didn't have the ability to focus or concentrate even for a minute. So there were so many knock-on impacts of this upward spiral that I was fortunate enough to get into.
You know, I think that most people have gotten to a point, because these things happen over time. It's not like you wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, my blood sugar is like nearly diabetic.
Right.
It's like these little creepy things where you get a little more tired, a little less focused, and moving a little slower. And I think what we've really gotten so far away from is knowing what feeling normal really feels like. And then you see all the commercials of or go to CVS or a Walgreens, and there's walls of things for GI issues and pain and inflammation and headaches. And you're like, okay, and it's like we forget that those are actually not normal. I had a mentor early on. He goes, it's not normal, because every year I would get sick in February. And I'd get sick in February because I worked in weight loss, and January was chaos. And so February I would get sick, and I thought it was normal.
Yeah,
and then I went, that's not normal.
No, not normal at all. Yeah, I think, as you say, like these diseases of modernity they're furtive and in nature, they're incredibly progressive. I think there's a great Hemingway quote on how you go broke very gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah.
Right?
The other side of it is the stress side of it, which you talked about, the stress and trauma, which if you go back, 1,000 years, you either survived the infection or the attack or the childbirth, or you didn't. There was no chronic stress going on, really, right?
Yeah, we were able to metabolize stress quickly, really. It's like I went for a hike here just like last week, right before a podcast, which I like to go clear my head. And I have these wonderful trails just right up here. And on my way back, there was like a rustling in the bramble, and then like a coyote plopped right down, in front of me about like 10 yards. And of course, like what happened in my body, like I had the totally normal involuntary stress response. Like my heart started pounding. Mm-hmm. I was talking to my mom actually at the time, and I hung up on her right away. I was like, sorry, mom. And my heart started pounding, my breath rate increased, my pupils dilated, became very, very focused. And of course, like under the crust of consciousness, there was all these things happening that I know about, like, cortisol was coursing through my brains. It was telling my liver to release glucose to send to my extremities to like fight or flight, classic response, right? And I kind of had a moment of a standoff. I didn't really fight. Didn't flight either, but, and the coyote sort of like looked at me and was like, no, you're not going to be lunch today. And just, sidled off into the woods. And 2 minutes later, I bounced back. I returned to homeostasis. And that's what the body is really engineered to do normally, is always return to middle, always, find that equilibrium, temperature control, acid alkaline balance. We're so engineered for homeostasis. And I had a normal, stress response, and it came and went. But that was very, very normal in Paleolithic times. Now, the coyote never leaves, really, in modern society. And it takes the form of, 24-hour news, incessant social media that is actually designed to leverage your human negativity bias around fear and outrage. And you're in a constant sympathetic overload. You're constant amygdala hijack. And we know what happens there. We know what happens physically there, with chronically elevated cortisol levels, which can sometimes invert, and be chronically low cortisol levels, but it disrupts, gut function, it disrupts immune function, it disrupts blood glucose balance, all these things. But it also disrupts social function, because when you kind of think about what happens when you have a stress response, like I said, your pupils dilate, but what's really happening is your aperture and your attention is getting super narrow, and you become very self-obsessed, and you distrust the world around you, and you see the world as a threat. And that's completely adaptive on the Serengeti. Completely adaptive. But in modern society, it's not. We wonder why we have no social trust, and that's completely eroded, that, we are self-obsessed, and it's a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're in this constant cycle of chronic distress.
So you've had the great fortune, because you had a yoga company for years, then you had this health epiphany, you went through that, and now you've got this commune business where you have some of the most amazing health and wellness experts in the world who are teaching. So you've got access to the best.
That's right.
And right? I mean, it's like, what a great thing you designed for yourself here.
Well, yeah, you pulled back the curtain there. It partially is for myself, but obviously it's for everybody.
It's for everybody, but we do build the businesses we want for ourselves, I hope. I mean, that's kind of like step one of marketing. And, I would hope that you're also benefiting from it. But I think what's interesting is we've identified these issues, whether it's social media, social isolation from that, being very comfortable, having like temperature control, having too much access to ultra-processed food, having chronic stress and trauma. We have all of these things. Now that you've had the opportunity to learn from so many different experts, how has that bled over into your routine? Like, what do you do now, because you know all of this stuff? And now you've managed to maintain, you're super healthy, you've maintained weight loss, which is one of the hardest things to do. It's like you're a unicorn if you're able to do this, basically, in our society. So what have you learned, and how's that impacted your routine?
Yeah, I have to grow a little horn on my forehead. Yeah, I mean, I'm incredibly lucky. I get to interview and talk to folks like you and many of our colleagues for a living. And then, I have this amazing property up in Topanga where so many people come and visit. And
I hope I get invited to actually go to that some point. What's a girl got to do?
It's an open invitation. I've been able to, distill 500 interviews into a series of protocols that I adopted. Like you, I do a tremendous amount of me search, right? I'm constantly trying things, and I'm curious, and I'm, jumping into my own N of one petri dish. And so, for me, what I started to think about my protocols as sort of good stress. So flipping that script on chronic distress and self-imposing these short-term acute Paleolithic stressors. And, some people call them adversity mimetics. Some people call it eustress. Some people call it hormesis. Essentially, any activity that pushes the edges of my comfort that confers positive benefits. And very quickly, I discovered that, doing hard things, not only makes other hard things easier, but actually has incredible benefits for longevity, for resilience. As you know, quite personally, probably the most overt example of good stress is overloading a muscle until those microfibers rip, and then giving it rest. And with enough protein, what happens, that muscle rebounds and grows bigger. And that is like some homely definition of hypertrophy. That applies to so many areas of your life. And so that's what I started to do. So part of my routine is daily. Well, first of all, I wake up and I get outside. And I think there's a lot of people that have been very articulate about light therapy. Again, I see this as part of our evolution. Like, we slept outside or in very, very humble little lean-tos and huts. We got outside with morning light, and we were able to get that, band of blue light between 380 and 500 nanometers in the inferior part of our retina, and that sets off this endocrine cascade, as you well know, that triggers melatonin some 14 hours later and helps us to sleep. And so getting outside first thing in the morning to start that cascade and set your circadian rhythm properly, that's part of my daily routine. I'm fortunate enough to work at home, so I have a heat therapy and cold therapy practice kind of every morning quite early.
What's quite early?
Probably like 6:30, so not like crazy, not like 5,
okay.
But 6:30 because I still have 3 daughters, and I like to see them in the morning, and so I try to do this before they get off to school. So I'll be in the sauna for 20 minutes at 190 degrees, 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Try to do that 5 or 6 times a week for sure, and do the whole contrast bathing routine. I have a cold plunge. I hate the cold, but I've learned to embrace it, and that was honestly where I saw a ton of change in my physical body and in my basic metabolic, and sort of my what I would probably call my basal metabolic rate, although that's just instinctual. But where I really saw this, JJ, was I was in a fasting protocol, so I wouldn't have eaten, for 14 hours or something, and then I would get into the cold. And what would happen there? So as soon as I got into the cold, obviously my core body temperature would plummet, and all my mitochondria and my brown fat would say, okay, we got to heat Jeff back up into the Goldilocks zone. So we got to get him back up to around 98.6. Let's make some energy. And then they would look around and be like, well, what are the energy substrates available? And at that juncture, because I would be in a fasting protocol, I'd have very, very, very low glucose, blood glucose. So my mitochondria would look around and say, okay, well, there's not really any glucose. What are we going to do? We're going to oxidize fat, and we're going to break down triglycerides into free fatty acids. We're going to use that fat as our energy substrate to make heat. And what I found was that cold therapy in the morning before breaking a fast, I just boy, my body just almost changed in front of my eyes. It was incredible. So that was a protocol stack that I found to be particularly impactful. Yeah. I don't know if that's a practice that you do.
I do it too. I feel the same way. I always say, what I hate the most is being cold. I live in Florida for a reason. We have 2 saunas at home. We have an infrared, a sunlighten, and that's our evening one that we will do. That's if we want to watch Netflix, we got to do it in the sauna. Then we got the fast heat one that goes up to 180. It does not go up to 200. And so we go into that one. I'll do that little one, which it's a little seated one, and then go into the cold plunge. Yeah. And I do not like being cold. However, it feels amazing. And and I so agree with you. And I think it's a really important thing to get is when you do hard things in that type of controlled environment, it translates over into all other areas of your life. It's same with resistance training, right? You do hard things. I hate sprinting. And so that's another thing that I'm doing. I got a sprint treadmill. That was my 60th birthday present, was a sprint treadmill, because I was like, hate sprinting, don't like running. I'm going to do that. That's what I'll do, right? So it does. You're so right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's obviously the physical component of it, and then there's a very, very significant psychological component that you just pointed to. So like getting in the cold, it's honestly not that different than the coyote, candidly. What happens? You get in the cold and you're like, it takes your breath away, right? And your heart starts pounding and you get this epinephrine rush and you feel like a sense of panic bubbling up, right? And then you have this space of like, okay, can I use conscious breath or leverage my neo-mammalian prefrontal cortex to push top-down pressure on top of this involuntary bottom-up response? And as you refine that capability by doing this practice over and over again, what you find is that you are more resilient and able to emotionally regulate in other parts of your life, that practice punctuates the rest of your life, such that if you encounter a stressful situation, which inevitably you do, then you have that skill to push that back down. And that is so useful. So it's not just about like what happens in the cold at that time. It's how it really punctuates and spills into the other parts of your life. And I totally, like with resistance training, for example, like I never was a squatter. That was my what sprints are to JJ, squats were to Jeff. I just was never part of my deal. But I'm a competitive tennis player. So my friend Light Watkins got me started squatting, and I became kind of like almost quasi addicted to it. At first, like I couldn't get down at all. My knees were hurting, popping and cracking and all this stuff. And then, over time, I just got better at it. And boy, did I notice it on the tennis court. Especially did I notice it in the third set of very, very competitive matches where I was like, whoa, I'm not going anywhere. And where that bled into my psychology is like I would go out and play very, very good players, but there was a confidence that built up. Because of my physiological training, it spilled over into this confidence where it's like, you're not going to beat me because in the third set, I'm still going to be all here. And that created a sense of ease and flow for me on the tennis court that was really powerful. So this was like where, your physiology and training your physiology spills over into your psychology all the time.
And what's fun is that could translate into really being a metaphor for life. Because what I look at now is I go, I am more fired up to be, like I just turned 61, and I'm more fired up about like, what can I accomplish now? Like, how fit can I be now? What can I do now? And I'm actually pushing myself more now than I ever did in my 50s. I was like, honestly, a little bit in a rut in my 40s and 50s. And now I'm like, game on, and it all compounds. It's like interest, just like you said. You do the cold, and you go, okay, that was hard. What else can I do that's hard? I'll go do the sprint. That's hard. Okay, I'll do squats. And what I really like to think about is quite often we'll start to look at these things and go, oh, my knees hurt, so I shouldn't do that, or I've got a bad back, so I shouldn't squat. And I think the reality is actually the opposite. That totally. Those reasons we're saying we can't do it, why we shouldn't do it, actually are the reasons why we should. Because these are the things that are going to carry us through in life, because in life you have to squat, right?
Well, again, of course, you're asking yourself that question, how did we evolve? We were squatting all the time. And, one thing that I will say that I do think that's important is when you get into a cold plunge, you don't get into a 34-degree plunge the first time.
I don't ever get into a 34-degree
Right.
plunge. Yeah. To be clear.
Fair enough. But my point is like, well, with cold, it's actually really interesting because it's totally subjective, right? So you can get all the benefits from a 59-degree water if it feels cold. But I guess what I'm saying is, we start easy and small and we make it a practice. Like I wasn't doing, 30 squats with a ton of weight, the first day. I was doing just basic air squats, holding onto a dance bar. I couldn't get my heels anywhere close to the ground. But you just start and you just say, today I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable. And the next day, maybe a little bit more. And with, cold, you can increase duration and decrease temperature. There's all these ways to continue to sort of attenuate or dial up and titrate the level of discomfort, but just become very comfortable with that discomfort because you know that there's just so much freedom on the other side of it.
Yes, beautifully said. Now, I'd love to tell everyone about Commune. I know we're going to give a 30-day guest pass to everyone. So talk about Commune, like, what made you start it? What is it? How will it benefit them?
Totally. Well, Commune, it could really be best understood as the masterclass for well-being. So, we have a platform with 150 courses with the best, most prolific, respected teachers, authors, wellness practitioners, you included, and many of the folks that you've had on your show, Mark Hyman and David Perlmutter and Jeffrey Bland, and kind of just the pantheon of functional medicine folks, Gabby Reese and Jillian Michaels, et cetera. So across the whole board. And it's really a place to go for holistic well-being. It's, yoga, meditation, nutrition, really everything that people need to be holistically well. So, it's just at onecommune.com. And I really encourage people to get over there and try it out. There's really something for everyone, and it just kind of meets people where they are.
Cool. I love that because, I think that it can be intimidating sometimes to think about where you get started. And the most important thing is just to start. And if that means that you just started, you were walking 2,500 steps a day and now you're doing 4,000, awesome. If that means that you start eating a little more protein, awesome. It's like just get started and continue to push, push a little bit more out of that comfort zone, just like you talked about. I'm going to put this at jjvirgin.com/onecommune, and that will be that free 30-day pass to get into the Commune courses. And again, just like you said, like you've got amazing instructors in there. So it's a great place to come in and just pick one and start moving forward. And then all of a sudden you'll look back, and I look back at you like, you just progress. And at some point I got to see pictures of the old Jeff because I was like,
I'll send some over.
I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, my wife has combed through them. She's like, you can share that one, but not that one.
No, that's the one you do want to share.
I know. I'll work on her.
We're all a work in progress. That's the most important thing. It's like
that's totally it. There's no terminus. We don't get to quote unquote wholeness, but what we do want to do is heal, and really healing is just that journey towards wholeness. And one thing that I've learned is that we have more agency over that than we ever thought we did. The last 50 years of the 20th century was sort of dominated by genetic determinism. It's sort of we were dealt a hand of cards, and that's what we had to play with. And what we've learned in the last 20 years or so through neuroplasticity and the microbiome and epigenetics and all these really just fascinating emerging fields in medical science is that we are not fixed at all. We are constant process, changing at every moment, 37 billion chemical reactions per second in relation to our environment. And that is scary, but it's also really empowering because we do have agency. I sometimes call this the age of agency, and everyone can take that power back away from, whether it's like the pharmaceutical industry or the kind of conventional medical industry, and take that power back into your own hands and become, the CEO of your own healthcare.
And it's so much easier to do when you've got one commune.
Yes.
Like, you're making it easy. There you go. Thank you for all the work you're doing, because it's fantastic. I love what you're doing, and I appreciate you so much.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, your message is so powerful, and there's not a day that goes by that your name doesn't come up in some conversation that I'm having. So you've just made such an imprint. So thanks.
Well, how cool is that? Thank you. Appreciate it. Be sure to join me next time for more tools, tips, and techniques you can incorporate into everyday life to ensure you look and feel great and are built to last. Check me out on Instagram, Facebook, and my website, jjvirgin.com, and make sure to follow my podcast at subscribetojj.com so you don't miss a single episode. And hey, if you're loving what you hear, don't forget to leave a review. Your reviews make a big difference in helping me reach more incredible women just like you to spread the word about aging powerfully after 40. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Hey, JJ here, and just a reminder that the Well Beyond 40 podcast offers health, wellness, fitness, and nutritional information that's designed for educational and entertainment purposes only. You should not rely on this information as a substitute for, nor does it replace professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have any concerns or questions about your health, you should always consult with a physician or other healthcare professional. Make sure that you do not disregard, avoid, or delay obtaining medical or health-related advice from your healthcare professional because of something you may have heard on the show or read in our show notes. The use of any information provided on the show is solely at your own risk.